Hi, everyone. My name is Shada Esnasheri. I am the Drinking Water Program Manager at River Network, which is a national organization that provides capacity building and network connectivity resources to folks working on all things water. I'm based in Chicago, Illinois, actually, and I'm a former Crystal's my old boss. I used to work for the Alliance for the Great Lakes, so I learned a lot of what I know today from working with Crystal. So it's always an honor to be able to continue to work with her in my new role. But yeah, my focus is on drinking water and ensuring that folks have access to clean, safe, and affordable drinking water throughout the Great Lakes region and nationally.
Great. Great. So thanks to everyone for staying online this long. I know it's a Friday at 2 o'clock. We will not use the entire time, just to let you know, because we are just as tired as you are. And so I feel you, we see you, and hopefully this will be an engaging and informative experience. Shada, do you want to kick it off?
Sure. Just get oriented with the slides. So first I wanted to start off by going over the goals and starting with a little bit of a icebreaker. So in the chat, I can't see it right now, but if you guys want to share, we're going to be talking about drinking water. Share in the chat, how have you used water today? So take a couple minutes to just reflect, whether that's drinking water, taking a shower, no judgment if you haven't showered today. Think about all the ways that you have intersected or interacted with water today. When I cut out, but our goal today is to discuss current water issues and ways to advocate to ensure everyone has access to clean, safe, and affordable water. As you heard from Crystal's extensive resume, she's a seasoned advocate, and so we're going to learn a lot from her, not only about the intersection of water and advocacy, but specifically about how to be an advocate. And then I'm going to go over some resources and important programs related to water access and affordability and that sort of thing. So I just wanted to flag a few norms. Please keep yourself on mute while we're presenting. We'll have time to talk in the middle of the presentation and afterwards. It's okay to have distractions. It's a weird time, so like do what you got to do. And you can go ahead and add comments and questions via the chat throughout the presentation. We won't have much time for prompting, so just when you think of something, we'll try to keep an eye on the chat. So, Crystal, you want to take it over?
Yeah, so, and you can hear me, right? Yeah, so it's about advocacy. I don't want to go too elementary where I'm to the point where I'm insulting you, but I think this year we've seen advocacy in action for sure. And it's so imperative that we speak out and speak up in so many different ways. And a lot of times when I do advocacy training for youth, there's questions about whether or not advocacy really works. And I have so many instances now that I can think of in recent memory of really compelling advocacy campaigns and how it was successful. A lot of times I talk about the Trayvon Martin movement where we were blacking out our profiles, or we on social media, or everybody was taking a picture with their hoodie on, and it just became a thing. And it really compelled action in government because they knew that people were watching and holding them accountable. There was also more environmentally focused. There were pics of the turtle with the straw in his nostril that went pretty viral. And it really shed a light on plastic pollution issues. And again, it's something that didn't even require words, just something that was a graphic that was compelling and spurred action in various places. And so the first key is knowing your audience, whether that be elected officials or media. I think it's a worthy venture to target all of them, depending on the issue. I would encourage you to track legislation at all levels of government. And that sounds like really overwhelming. I had the privilege of working in the Ohio House of Representatives as an aide. And that's where I was fortunate enough to meet my husband, who worked in the Senate with Leo and others. And so one of the things that we were charged with doing was tracking legislation. And so many times we hear that, well, I don't know if any of it really appeals to me, especially when I'm talking with youth groups. And I always think back about the time when there was a bill that it would basically add hours onto the school day. So instead of there being snow days, there would be snow hours. And so it was a possibility of, instead of you getting out of school at 2:30, students would get out of school at 6 o'clock because they had a late start that day, which sounded outlandish. But again, you're thinking about the makeup of the room, and there aren't any youth in the room when they're making these laws. I saw a question in the chat about, is there a singular source to track all bills? Unfortunately, there's not. However, I periodically go to, for state level legislation, you can Google Ohio legislation. I know I could probably memorize the actual email web address by now, but I still do it. I go to Ohio legislation and Google that. The first thing that comes up gives you an opportunity to put whatever keywords you want in. A lot of times I work on water issues, so I put water in, and all of the bills that have anything to do with water come right up. And so that's how I like to keep track periodically of water legislation, but it's definitely something you should be on top of. So we know that COVID has completely changed everything, and it's definitely impacted our advocacy strategies. And so in addition to tracking bills electronically, you want to make sure that there are so many different tabs where you can get a summary of the bill. You can see the status of the legislation, see the committee chairs, and really keep abreast of what's happening. It's actually helped us in some ways in terms of bill tracking, because you don't have to go to Columbus to testify on a bill. You can submit a written testimony. You can watch some hearings that are being webcast. And so also, as we approach this next election, there is virtual engagement around candidates forums now. And so you can think of what questions you want to ask and attend candidates forums all over the state, and submit your questions on your issue of choice, and attend and request virtual meetings and town halls for your legislators. And I'd also encourage you to sign up for e-newsletters so that you are being kept abreast of what your elected representatives are working on. So there are a lot of resources that are available right now to help you verify your registration status, your polling location, the candidates, and what their stance is on a number of different things. On our website, if you just go to greatlakes.org, the first thing that pops up on our website is our voter information guide, which you can put in your name and your address, and it will populate who your candidates are for your area and all of your polling place. It is imperative that you check these things. We are so easily going under the assumption that, like, oh yeah, I know I go down to the church down on the corner, or I know I'm registered, which a lot of people have said and found out that they were purged from the polls, even my own dad. And so I encourage you to look this up and verify these things and have it. And you've heard it time and time again. I know I have, having a plan to vote. That is very real. I just got off the phone with my mom, and she's saying that there are lines wrapped around like the whole area in Summit County for the Summit County Board of Elections, where you can't even turn onto the street. And so you need to have a plan and a backup plan for how you intend to vote this year. And again, we have other resources here. Next.
So thank you, Crystal, for that. And like, yes, I totally second the having a voting plan and having a backup plan. These are really tough times, and we're seeing it across the country, people having trouble voting. It's unlike any other year. So I just want to take a second to kind of ground us in where our water comes from, what we think of when we think of water, thinking about water as a right. So I live in Chicago. I've got Lake Michigan in my backyard. You guys are in Cleveland. You've got Lake Erie in your backyard. These are like a vital resource that I think we take for granted living in the Great Lakes region. They're a super unique resource. They provide drinking water for upwards of 40 million people around the region. They also act as an economic driver for tourism, for recreation, and they're just really unique to the Midwest. They face many threats, however, whether it's pollution or invasive species, which we'll talk a little bit more about later in the presentation. And protecting the Great Lakes at their source is really vital to ensuring that you have clean water running through your faucet or your tap at home. So no matter where you live, no matter what you do, as we've seen from the icebreaker in the beginning, water is a vital resource for all. And we see this even more in the midst of a pandemic, that it is vital to our public health and everybody should have access to clean, safe, and affordable water. So one of the first steps in ensuring that people have access to water is understanding where it comes from, understanding what goes into ensuring that the water is clean when it comes into your water system and comes out the other end at your faucet. So it's kind of a complicated process, lots of different players involved, from conservationists to water utilities to community groups. It affects everyone, and working from point A to point B is really essential. So one of the biggest ways to ensure that you have clean water coming out of your tap is ensuring that there is federal funding for our drinking water and clean water infrastructure. So what I mean when I talk about that, there are two different loan funds that come from the federal government. They go to state government and then they get dispersed to different cities like Cleveland, Chicago, etc. And these funds help cities pay for their water infrastructure. So what do I mean when I say water infrastructure? I mean the pipes under the ground that none of us think about in our day-to-day, that ensure that water gets from a lake or a river or whatever it is, whatever your source of drinking water is, travels safely and cleanly to your faucet at an affordable rate as well. So infrastructure funding is essential to making water affordable, because what happens when we don't have government investment in water infrastructure, it doesn't stay maintained forever. You need to continually put money into it. When the federal government or your state government doesn't put money into it, that rate goes back to the ratepayer. So that's your mom, dad, whoever the user is who's paying the utility bill. And we've seen over the last several decades that investment in water infrastructure has gone down, bills have gone up, which means that people are losing access to water because they can't afford their water bill. So you'll see here our nation's drinking water system has been graded, I believe, by the American Society of Engineers as a D, meaning that it's falling apart, it needs to be repaired, and the conversation right now is how do we pay for it? So we are really advocating for increased federal funding for water infrastructure to ensure clean, safe, and affordable water for all. The other water infrastructure that we don't talk about as much maybe, or isn't as front of mind, is sewage and stormwater infrastructure. So across the Great Lakes region, it's really common to have something called a combined sewer. And what that means is when we have increased rainfall, like due to climate change, you see heavier amounts of rain flowing down your drains in your street, and they go into a pipe underground that is combined with where your sewage goes. So when you flush your toilet, all that water, where that goes, combines with the rainwater. And the way a combined sewer is designed is to overflow before it reaches capacity. And where it overflows to your rivers, streams, lakes, fresh water. This is a really old arcane system. And so many states and cities are under federal orders or something called a consent decree to reduce the number of combined sewer overflows. And how you do that is you replace the combined sewers with more modern infrastructure. So funding is needed for that. Another approach to that, which is actually another piece of combating climate change, is something called green infrastructure. So that's planting trees or more green spaces to absorb the extra rainfall that we're seeing with climate change. It also helps with heat islands in cities. So it's a win-win. But of course, you need money for this. Whether it's green infrastructure or gray infrastructure, like pipes and stuff, it requires funding. And again, so sewage and stormwater systems are doing a little bit better according to the American Society of Civil Engineers and getting a D+. But again, this infrastructure is falling apart. And we're seeing, again, with increased rainfall, a lot more combined sewer overflows that pollutes our waterways, that costs extra money to then clean and get to the tap. It contributes to unaffordability. It's a hot mess. And at the end of the day, we need more investment in water infrastructure. Crystal, you want to take it over from here?
Nicely put, Shada. Hot mess. That's exactly what it is. And just for clarification, Ohio is facing a $27 billion price tag over the next 20 years. And so we know that our systems need to be updated. However, we don't want that to fall on the backs of Ohioans who are already struggling to pay their water bills. And so in 2019, the Alliance for the Great Lakes partnered with the Ohio Environmental Council and researcher Dr. Manny Teodoro of Texas A&M University until like the end of the month. I think he's moving to Madison. To study water affordability in Ohio. And we learned a few things. We learned that it is both an urban and a rural issue. And, you know, for most people, you're like, oh, of course it is. Yeah, that makes sense. But no, that is something that needs to be stressed in our legislature to build political will necessary to address the issue. We need to let legislators know from both urban areas and Appalachia that you have constituents that cannot afford their water. It is an issue that is unifying all of us together. And so let's work collaboratively to address this issue. It's not necessarily exclusively a race issue. It is an income inequality issue. And I use lots of qualifiers here because I understand that the root causes of income inequality are based on race. And so if you say what we're trying to say is exclusively, it is not just a racial issue, it's an income inequality issue. And there are socioeconomically disadvantaged folks in all parts of the state. However, those root causes in urban areas are redlining, job discrimination, racism. Those root causes in rural parts of the state are them not being able to reach economies of scale. And so though the root causes are different, they have some similarities in terms of the fact that it's based on income inequality. And so the other thing to note is that we are working with partners to address these issues however we can. We have to be clear about the fact that water affordability and water assistance are two different things. Representative Erica Crawley of Columbus introduced a bill this year, House Bill 639, the Water for All bill, which will put a moratorium on water shutoffs permanently and institute some customer assistance programs that are based on income. It also includes a debt forgiveness program. If you've paid your bill continuously for 2 years, you should be able to have some debt forgiveness. And so those are some of the core elements of that legislation. And so we have been guaranteed a hearing this year for sponsor testimony, where the sponsor of the bill, Rep. Crawley, will give her testimony on why she has introduced the legislation. And we hope to also have an opportunity for proponent testimony, some folks who are in support of the bill, to be able to lend voice to why this is so imperative for Ohio. Next. And so along those lines, we're also working to make sure that the water that you are paying for is also safe and drinkable. And so part of that is working on lead service line replacement. It is a very real issue. We've seen a lot of work in Ohio on lead in paint issues, and we're seeing some traction and some progress there, but we're also hoping to address lead pipes issues. And so we know that Ohio is second in the nation with 650,000 lead service lines, and that needs to be remedied because there is no safe level of lead in the body. And so we have worked with partners to introduce House Bill 730, which is introduced by Rep. Russo and Rep. Greenspan, that will basically say that the state has 20 years to replace all lead service lines. And that is basically the state saying that municipal level governments have those 20 years to come up with an inventory of how many lead service lines do you have? What are the maps looking like? There already is a requirement to produce maps. We need uniformity in those maps though, because everybody's maps looks different at this point. And then say, what is your plan to replace all the lead service lines in your service area within the next 20 years? And the last component I'll mention is that we'd like to make some monies available for private side lead service line replacement, and not partial, but full lead service line replacement, and money available to private homeowners to fix those fixtures in their homes. I had the privilege of talking with folks from Flint, and though a lot of progress has been made, I'm still hearing from a lot of my colleagues that live and work in Flint that it doesn't matter if all the fixtures in your home are full of lead. And so they need money available to update those fixtures as well. Shada, do you have anything to add here?
Yeah, I would just say, like, in general, across the Great Lakes region, we have, Flint really put the lead issue on the map, but it's an issue across the region as well. And so absolutely Cleveland and state of Ohio should be concerned about it as well, because standards were just different when our infrastructure was being built. I will also say, we're talking a lot about like what states and cities can do to address affordability or water shutoff moratoriums. And we've seen with COVID-19 and people losing their incomes because they're losing their jobs, that a lot more people were having their water shut off. So state by state, folks are doing water shutoff moratoriums, but a lot of those are expiring. So some of them are tied to state of emergencies, and as we've come out of our shutdowns, so too have those orders expired. So part of what we're working on at the federal level as well is a complete moratorium on water shutoffs, so that it's not up to your state or city. And as always, the thing that is needed to go along with that is funding in order for the water utilities to keep functioning without the income from their ratepayers. So and in order to continue work on lead service line replacement and that sort of thing, there's just a desperate need for money for this issue.
For sure. Another key issue for us at the Alliance for the Great Lakes is agricultural pollution. It's a very real issue. We are talking about the phosphorus that runs off of farm fields from fertilizer and runs into Lake Erie and creates these harmful algal blooms that have detrimental effects to public health and to the aquatic ecosystem. If you hearken back, 6 years now, to the Toledo water crisis, where there was the combination of a huge harmful algal bloom in the western basin of Lake Erie, and then failing infrastructure. When those two things meet, you get green tap water, which you can't just boil away. And that's the compelling part when I talk to family members who don't have a background in this issue. They're like, oh, they couldn't just boil their water? No, that concentrates it even more. And so there were literally groups that were going house to house to stop senior citizens from drinking coffee that they had made that morning full of algae blooms. And so it is a huge issue that is not only affecting the health of our lake, but our tourism and our economy and our health. And so it's a huge issue that definitely needs the attention of the legislature. We applaud Governor DeWine this year and last year for the introduction, and the legislature for the introduction of House H2 Ohio, which is a $172 million funding program that was a sizable down payment for addressing agricultural pollution. It gave money to large agricultural operations to address, so they can invest in best management practices and doing all the things that they need to do to basically reduce the runoff into the lakes. But we know that that still is not going to be enough. I think the thing that's most concerning for us right now is that we know that's not going to be enough. While we applaud it, thank you for the attention, thank you for the investment, we know that we're going to need some stringent measures to reach the clean water outcomes we want to get to. My major concern at this point is that there is no oversight structure that will hold everybody accountable. And there are other smaller groups of folks that are paying attention to H2 Ohio and trying to weigh in where appropriately. And the groups that have the most power and influence with the administration right now don't have any people of color at the table. And so that's problematic. And so it's the need to basically reiterate to everyone that will listen that content expertise and diversity are not mutually exclusive, and that there are people of color that work in this realm, and impacted folks who should be at the table. The folks in Toledo were a myriad of races, a myriad of socioeconomic statuses that deserve to be at the table as they start to think about solutions for remedying, trying to get a remedy to these issues. So next.
Cool. And I like what you said there, Crystal, with content expertise and diversity not being mutually exclusive. I think that's super, super important. So we want to just give a quick example. So one of the things Crystal was just talking about is that there's no oversight of this funding, and like essentially no legal requirements for agricultural producers to follow through on best practices and that sort of thing. So regulation gets treated like a dirty word in many industries in this day and age. But that's where you as a community member, as an advocate, come in, because honestly, we need people, our citizens, to step up and know what's going on, and be able to advocate for best practices or clean water or whatever it is. So in thinking about your drinking water, first of all, River Network put together something called a drinking water guide, which is basically drinking water 101, from where does my drinking water come from? Why should I care about it? What are the legal frameworks around making sure my water is safe to drink? What does it cost to deliver clean drinking water? So what stuff about water infrastructure funding, where that comes from, what goes into a utility bill, what it costs to repair and maintain water infrastructure, and then how can I get involved? So more about that advocacy piece about how do I ensure access to safe and affordable drinking water in my own community, whether that's asking the right questions or attending public meetings, making public comments. All of this is being done virtually now, so there's still an opportunity to get involved. But to my mind, being an advocate is knowing the right questions to ask and the resources available to find answers to those questions, and how to talk to your elected officials. So the next thing I just wanted to highlight here, so on the left-hand side, you see the drinking water guide. We have had it translated into Spanish as well, and I've worked with some Spanish partners on ensuring that this is like a culturally competent version of the guide, because like Crystal said, diversity and content expertise do not have to be mutually exclusive. So we want to make sure that this is accessible to all communities that need access to clean and safe water, and want to be advocates. You can also see here the water affordability report that Crystal mentioned, done by Manny Teodoro, the voter toolkit, etc. So there are a ton of resources out there to guide you through the process of becoming an advocate and an issue expert. So the sky's the limit. I say go for it. So
and the other, our voter information guide is also in English and Spanish as well. And so if you go to our website, we're making a concerted effort to make sure these materials are translated. We're also working with Ohio EPA on translating some educational materials as well. So.
All right. And that's all we have.